both sides hate him, both sides.
Yeah.
As we're doing this, I'm seeing reports coming that they expect an attack tonight or tomorrow.
Well, of course, it wasn't an interview. This was a chat between Donald Trump and one of his best mates, his biggest fan and his most powerful supporter. And that doesn't really bring out the best in Trump, because it allowed him, instead of going in a straight line down the topics that an interviewer would normally bring up, it allowed him to ramble all over the place and to relax a little bit too much. And when he relaxes, his voice always relaxes as well. And that, I believe, is the main factor in the way that a sort of slur appeared in some of his words. He really needs to focus on the way that his voice comes out under pressure. And in order to be as compelling as possible, he needs to hit his consonants, just like I did then. The unfortunate thing for him is that there wasn't much video footage, as I understand it, just 20 seconds of it. And that 20 seconds wasn't very flattering. It showed him hunched over a device on his desk, and it didn't look good. And again, he was treating it like a radio interview where he thought the visuals didn't matter. And therefore, because again, he was relaxed and also perhaps a little bit tired, he wasn't as focused on the way that his voice came out as he should have been. And he really does need to be careful about that, because now that Joe Biden has retired from the race, of course, Donald Trump is now the oldest candidate, and he must make sure that nothing he says or the way he says it could possibly play into and encourage the narrative of him going into cognitive decline. So this is an aspect he has to be extremely careful of from now on.
We cannot have her. She's incompetent. She's as bad as Biden in a different... Look, she hasn't done an interview since this whole scam started. And say what you want. This was a coup.
Trump has got a very distinctive voice. Unlike the vast majority of politicians who are either being interviewed or doing keynote speeches in front of big audiences, he has a tendency for his voice to go downwards, and always to start at a relatively high level, but then to go down as the sentence develops, as opposed to starting low at a particular level and then building up, and bringing the audience's emotions up with him. Now, he somehow succeeds with this downward delivery because it plays into the emotions of the people who seem to be his hardcore supporters. He's tapping into their anger and sometimes sense of despair, and somehow they love that. So he's always had this downward tendency, but I've never noticed a lisp or a slur before. I think the two tendencies together are not a good thing for him, and he needs to be very, very focused on having a straight line approach in terms of his material and a very focused approach in terms of the way that he says it. He now is in the uncomfortable position of not being the vigorous attacker. He is being attacked, and he doesn't like that at all. And so he's swinging out at Kamala Harris, using really quite personal insults instead of focusing on some of the negative aspects of, for instance, the immigration non-achievement of the Biden administration, and arguably some of the economic non-achievement of the administration. And so he's like a wounded animal striking out in all directions. And during the 2 hours of the interview, he was really going back, trotting through his greatest hits, still mentioning Joe Biden and still talking about the way the last election allegedly was stolen from him. he needs to concentrate on two things. Number one, making sure that he's attacking policy, not personality. And number two, he needs to prepare his words so that they go in a straight line instead of going all over the place. Because the Trump ramble won't work against somebody as focused as Kamala Harris. I would summarize it as it wasn't the right forum for him. He allowed himself just to speak and ramble. And so that therefore meant that he relaxed too much. And really, he needs to make sure that he's not only mentally focused, but he's physically focused on the way that the words come out. And because he wasn't that focused, they came out in rather a slurred way.
It wasn't exactly the news fest we were hoping it might be. Donald Trump went through his usual sort of lines. He's struggling to find really a crystallized attack on his new opponent, Kamala Harris, after Joe Biden pulled out. He used to be very, very good at sort of picking names for people, little Marco Rubio, you know, Rick the Sanctimonious and things like that, Crooked Hillary, Sleepy Joe. And I think he's slightly struggling now with a new opponent that obviously has got the full backing, the full-throated backing of the sort of US sort of media class, the political class. They're really trying to put the bellows under Harris, who, you know, these are the same people who were saying there was nothing wrong with Joe Biden a few weeks ago and that she was a useless vice president a few months ago. But now she can seem to do no wrong. And so he's slightly using slightly different tactics to try and sort of break through. Again, something he used to be very good at. You know, his Twitter feed used to be, you know, it could literally upend news agendas. It could move markets. It could, you know, wipe out days of US broadcast media just from a tweet. But he's slightly losing his sort of power on that. So he's back on Twitter. He was there with Elon Musk. They've got a combined following of 250 million people. You know, multiple millions of people watched the conversation last night when they could. So there's no doubt that it got reach. And it does bypass the mainstream media. But actually, it was like a weird conversation. It wasn't really an interview. It was a very, very sort of freewheeling couple of hours. Musk could barely get a word in.
I looked to the right, and the bullet came whizzing by, hitting my ear. So it was amazing. But when you think of the odds of that, and you know that,
and we sort of got the greatest hits of Donald Trump that we've had for the last few months. You know, his newfound sort of spirituality that you know, he's saying that he was saved by God from a sniper's bullet. He's obviously gone on Harris on her work on the border, calling her the failed, you know, liberal border czar. I thought it was quite fascinating. Again, he said it before, but his genuine belief that actually the world was safer under the Trump presidency, and that people like Vladimir Putin wouldn't have invaded Ukraine had he been still in the White House, and actually dictators around the world and despots don't know how he's going to react. So he did riff on that, but it doesn't seem to be having much of an impact. The betting markets this morning remain static. The Democrats have nudged ahead for the first time in months as favorites to win the election in November. And if this was designed to perhaps restart Donald Trump's campaign, you know, the verdict from the US media this morning is it hasn't moved the dial. The betting markets haven't moved this morning. And, you know, different polls show different things, and all the campaigns will have their own internal polling. Trump's still claiming he's ahead, but there are a number of public polls available in the swing states that show that actually it's frankly so close it's within the margin of error. You know, there's barely 3 points between them, so it's a total toss-up. Obviously, Harris has reinvigorated the Democrats' campaign. There's no disputing that. Joe Biden cuts an incredibly lonely figure now. You almost sort of forget he's still the president when he turned up on the beach at the weekend, and you thought, you know, he sort of really is now a lame duck. But I do think Trump needs to crystallize his attacks on Harris and Waltz. He had a very good line about Tim Waltz, the vice presidential candidate, very left-wing guy. Quite an unusual choice, I think, for Harris, who one of her biggest weaknesses is seen as he is of the sort of radical left wing of the Democrats, and that was a stick that Trump will use to sort of clobber the campaign as much as he can. But he had a good line on Waltz, which was, you know, he was asked about Tim Waltz, and he said, well, this guy is the guy that put tampons in boys' toilets. That's all I need to say. I don't need to hear any more about him. And I think that will resonate with quite a lot of normal people who hear things like that and think, what is the world coming to? It was a pretty obvious line that she's sticking to. They're desperately trying to push this line that Trump and the Republicans are weirdos. And they basically said his hard right mask slipped. It was all there to be seen. He was interviewed, you know, by his patsy mate. It was quite unusual for Elon Musk, who has, you know, endorsed Donald Trump, to be basically saying, I think I think you should vote for this guy, and I'm going to sit and talk to him. It wasn't an interview in any traditional sense of the word. But Harris is in a tricky spot. You know, more than 3 weeks now since she has been anointed as the candidate, having never won a single vote. She hasn't done a single interview, and not just an interview with a tech billionaire who's gone a bit Bond villain. She hasn't done a single unscripted moment. She's going to have to face the music at some point, and I do think people around her are worried, and you see it in videos that when she goes off the auto cue, she's a bit strange and she says weird stuff. So I think they're desperately trying to keep her on a tight leash, but it is a bit rich for her to be attacking people for giving interviews when she won't talk to the press. She won't do, she won't do a press conference. Donald Trump did one for an hour and a half with the entire US media last week. He's done 2 hours unscripted with Elon Musk last night. His rallies are, they're long, but he often goes off the auto cue. His campaign are annoyed about that as well. And obviously we're now coming to the debates. At some point, she's going to have to, face scrutiny. And I wonder whether actually, Donald Trump's having a tough couple of weeks with trying to scramble around to find a new candidate. But he is obviously pushing more for more debates now. He wants to have 3 showdowns or come out. Harris is only committed to 1. I suspect they'll land somewhere in the middle. That's going to be a real moment for him where he can actually really start to up his attacks, and the public will be able to see what Harris is actually like when she's not cocooned in the safety of a well-run campaign sort of stop and moment. She's turning up on these stump speeches in different states, in different towns, giving identical speeches from the same auto cue. That can't last for the whole 3 months. So she can have a go at Donald Trump all he likes for doing interviews, but she needs to start doing some as well.